Hello, welcome to our Sunday morning edition of The Papers. With me are Kunal Dutta, freelance journalist, and Peter Kellner, president of Yougov, the polling organisation. Just before we speak to them, let's have a look at some of the front pages. The Sunday Telegraph leads on comments by the Home Secretary Theresa May that the European Union is stifling Britain's economy with red tape. The Sunday Times has carried out a Yougov poll, how appropriate, which finds that only 34% of people who voted Labour at the last general election believe Ed Miliband is up to the job of Prime Minister. The Observer says Ed Miliband is in a new crisis over his leadership, revealing that Labour MPs have told the paper there are 20 shadow ministers on the brink of calling for their leader to stand down. The Sunday Express has a Remembrance Sunday themed front page, carrying the words of a 15-year-old First World War sailor back home to his mum, describing the hardships of life at sea. The Mail on Sunday has more on the Labour leader, reporting that the Shadow Education Secretary Tristram Hunt believes that Ed Miliband's attempts to revive his personal ratings have been a total failure, though he does deny saying that a little bit later. Finally, The Independent on Sunday splits its front in half. Its main image is on Remembrance Sunday, but it also follows the Labour leadership story, reporting that some of the party's donors are dropping Ed Miliband. So plenty to talk about. Kunal, let's start with you, can we? That Independent front page that we mentioned there, a lot of others have done the same, but poppies are everywhere.
Yes, I think the beauty of this front page really is in its simplicity. If you look at the one thing that's really sort of come out this year particularly has been the sheer scale of the number of lives lost in World War I. I mean, that number is massive, 888,456. It's, to put it into scale, it's 1,900 times the amount of soldiers that we lost in Afghanistan recently. So I think it really does feel like there's sort of seminal momentum behind Memorial Day, and I think that's a very good thing this year.
Peter, you picked something out of another paper which really impressed you.
All the papers have pictures, but I thought the Sunday Mirror spread on pages 2 and 3 really wins the prize. As I go on saying, you have these poppies representing each death, but look at that Sunday Mirror story. That sort of really brings home the scale of it. And I think on a day when striking pictures are telling the story, this is the most striking picture of all.
The thing that, so many things one could talk about on this, but it is the way it crosses the generations, isn't it? And there's people, little children with poppies on, and obviously elderly people, more elderly people, but right across the generations, almost everybody seems to have one on this year.
That's right. I think it is extraordinary. Clearly it's the 100th anniversary, but also people are making the links with other things. And if the Sunday Mirror contained the best picture, to my mind, the best article actually is Vince Cable's column in the Mail on Sunday, when he takes it away from the normal sort of nationalist fervour and says, look, it's an opportunity to remember why we're a European country and why immigrants are such a good thing, because it was people in the First World War from all over the then empire that worked to save Britain in that war. And so Vince Cable is making a link that not many people at the moment are making on Remembrance Sunday.
Sadly, a very contemporary link, Kunal, is the Sunday Telegraph has it on the front page, ring of steel around the Queen to foil a terrorist plot at the Cenotaph. This is a sad comment on our times, though, isn't it? You can't have these big events anymore without worrying about something going horribly wrong.
Well, I think absolutely right. The way the world we're now in, you're always going to have big events like this. It's not overshadowed, but it'll be part of a memorial like this. The thing to remember is these are these are arrests that happened on Thursday in High Wycombe and West London, and as of yet there isn't actually sort of conclusive evidence to suggest that there was a distinct plot on on Remembrance Day. So it has to be taken within within the context. Britain will always have, as long as we have foreign projects abroad, we will always have sort of some degree of home. And
we remember Enniskillen and don't want a repeat.
Of course, that's quite right, isn't it? Yeah, that was on Remembrance Sunday itself, wasn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Well, we remember with respect. But let's go on to grubby politics, I guess, Peter. You're the man, you're here. It's your organisation that is putting out one of these many polls that are going around about Ed Miliband and his leadership. Sunday Times front page says it pretty clearly. Labour voters say Miliband unfit to be PM. I mean, It seems to me that all leaders these days have a terrific problem keeping on top of their parties, no matter who they are.
You're absolutely right. The only party leader at the moment who has a positive net score with the public is Nigel Farage of UKIP. But nobody's imagining him to be Prime Minister. That's not really how they're judging him. Ed Miliband's ratings are very bad, and what the Sunday Times picks up is our finding that when you look at people who voted Labour in 2010, until this weekend, most of them thought Ed Miliband would make a reasonable Prime Minister. Now they don't, and that is where his recent drop in approval has come from most of all. Labour voters from 2010, and the bad news for Labour is that even the most defensive core vote strategy assumes that the people who voted Labour last time, when Labour lost heavily, at least they'd be loyal. And if they're not loyal, that's a problem for the party.
Now, where's this coming from? Was it that conference speech with the forgetting of a very key paragraph? But what's going on? Why is he so unpopular?
I think it's an accumulation of things. The two big things are these. One, he can do nothing about, which is that people threw Labour out last time. And a lot of voters say, look, don't bother us for the time. We threw you out. We're not really interested. And I think any Labour leader will be having a real struggle at the moment cutting through. It's very unusual for parties, once they're thrown out of office, to come back next time round. The second thing is, Ed Miliband simply, to many people, he looks like an interesting, bright, argumentative debater. He doesn't have, to most people, the gravitas of a Prime Minister. I personally think the big mistake he made in his conference speech was trying to commit it to memory at all. Prime Ministers don't prowl around a speech relying on their memory. They stand at a lectern and read out something substantial. Had he done that, I think he'd have looked more like a Prime Minister, and he wouldn't have forgotten the stuff about the deficit.
Indeed. Well, the Mail on Sunday there, they love their big dramatic headlines. Ed, Shadow Minister, plunges in the dagger. This was Tristram Hunt, Kunal. I mean, it must be said, Mr Hunt now says, oh, hang on, I didn't say that at all. But other papers talking about lots of ministers, shadow ministers, unhappy with Mr Miliband.
It kind of points to a problem inside the Labour Party. Whatever, I mean, Tristram Hunt has come, his name has been mentioned here, and he has subsequently denied it. But if there really is this sort of fervour inside the party, and there are all these disgruntled ministers that are, privately briefing the press, but refusing to sort of stand above the parapet and say anything, then they really do need to come forward, because this is a problem for Miliband now. And the problem arises because if you look at stories like The Observer, they're saying that there's 20 frontline ministers that are disgruntled. But actually, when you look at the story, there's 3 people that have picked up the phone and actually talked and cited these 20. So that's slightly disproportional.
Tomorrow we're told he's going to make this speech to the CBI. That's going to be music to the ears of the CBI, that we shouldn't leave the European Union and all that sort of thing. Do you think that's a sort of good strategy to attract the voters at large back to him? All these people who Peter was saying are so disenchanted now. Are they really good? Oh, well, he's firm on Europe, so that's all right then.
Primarily, it does what he needs to do, which is change the news agenda. You know, this story has been bubbling about his leadership credentials since Thursday. It's now Sunday, and names are being mentioned. Lucy Powell, Ed Miliband's new campaign manager, has got on Twitter yesterday, and she's started this, We Back Ed hashtag, which is now an attempt to try and unify the party. And if they can now sort of argue on Europe and create a sort of clear dividing line from David Cameron's point on Europe and his own challenges, then that kind of pushes the story on.
Yes,
can I briefly say, I agree that the Observer story is actually quite thin, but the interesting thing is that it leads the Observer at all, because there are some people around Ed Miliband saying, look, it's the Tory press, it's our traditional opponents doing the Prime Minister's bidding. The Observer doesn't do Tory bidding. The Observer is much more sympathetic to Labour than the Tories. And so when they say, as their main headline, Miliband in new crisis as senior MPs back leadership change, as it were, don't worry about the thinness of the story. The fact that the Observer decides to go that hard on it should be worrying the Labour leadership.
Indeed. And one thing quickly, Peter, shortage of other candidates. Do you ask voters, potential voters, who else they would like? Well, and do they say Alan Johnson, but he won't do it?
The one person who would make a difference, who would take Labour from level pegging to a 6-point lead, is David Miliband. Trouble is, he's not in Parliament. He's 3,000 miles away in New York. When you look at people like Alan Johnson, Ed Balls, Yvette Cooper, people like that, it makes very little difference. This is a problem This is a problem about Ed Miliband, but it's not only a problem about Ed Miliband, it's a problem to do with the Labour Party much more fundamentally.
Indeed. We haven't got much time, I'm afraid, but Kunal, just one quick story. It's inside the Observer about Catalonia, independence and all that comes back again. Of course, the Catalans have pushed and pushed and pushed for ages, haven't they? But here they are yet again, with many people in Scotland saying, oh, we should have done something different.
Well, they've actually taken a lot of inspiration, I think, from Scotland and the whole way that vote played into some kind of national passion in Scotland. I think Catalonians have had this for a while. What's going to be interesting today is this referendum isn't quite the referendum that is being built, in that it's not recognised in Spanish law, and therefore it's more a symbolic gesture of this is the sort of this is the feeling of the Catalonians, and it does push them one step closer to one day an actual referendum that could see a separation from Spain.
There are 7.5 million Catalonians with a vote. If 4 million, 4.5, 5 million, even though it's an unofficial, informal referendum, if you get a clear majority of that 7.5 million saying, we want separation, Madrid will try and knock it back, but it won't go away as an issue.
No, indeed. Kunal Dutta and Peter Kellner, as ever, thank you very, very much indeed. And just a reminder, we take a look at tomorrow's front pages and other stories as well every evening at 10:30 and 11:30 here on BBC News. Coming up to 12 minutes to 10, let's take a quick look at the headlines here on BBC News. The Queen will lead commemorations to honour the members of the armed forces killed in conflicts. She'll be joined by political leaders and veterans for a ceremony at the Cenotaph in London. American military officials claim airstrikes have hit a group of Islamic State leaders in northern Iraq. Commanders are unsure if the leader of IS has been killed. Ed Miliband warns that threats to leave the European Union are a clear and present danger to the UK's future prosperity. He says an EU exit would close us off from the world and risk jobs. Well, as we've just been discussing, people across Britain will fall silent at 11 o'clock to remember the servicemen and women who've given their lives in war. This year's remembrance commemorations also mark 100 years since the start of